Hello everyone! This next game was played in 2006. It was the Amber Blindfold tournament in Monte Carlo, and the game is played between Vassily Ivanchuk and the Dutch grandmaster Loek Van Wely. And it was an interesting event, a blindfold tournament featuring 12 of the world's greatest grandmasters, and the world was won by Alexander Morozevich with an incredible 9.5 out of 11 points. And he won it with 3 full points ahead of Francisco Valeo Pons and Vishy Anand. So that's 9.5 out of 11 without losing a single game. On the other hand, Vassily Ivanchuk here got last place in this tournament with 3.5 out of 11 points. So this is the only good game he played. Well, not the only good game, but the only game he won this tournament. And even second to last was Levon Aronyan with half a point more than Ivanchuk with 4 out of 11 points. So it was a weird tournament, a weird blindfold tournament. But nevertheless, this game here, Ivanchuk was incredibly praised for this game. So I decided to show it. It was also a suggestion from a subscriber. So let's see this game. Ivanchuk has the white pieces and he plays e4. We have c5 by Loek, knight to f3, and d6. So the Sicilian defense. d4, c captures, and knight to f6. Knight to c3 and a6, the Najdorf variation. Bishop to e3, now e6, and f3, the English attack of the Scheveningen. We have bishop to e7, now queen to d2, knight to c6, Ivanchuk castles queenside, Loek castles kingside, and g4. Ivanchuk starts his attack on the king side. Knight captures on d4, bishop captures on d4, and b5 now. Loek also now starts pushing his pawns on the queen side, and it's going to be as usual when you have opposite-sided castles. You know, who is faster, whose attack happens faster, that person usually wins. So Ivanchuk pushes g5. We have knight to d7 and now h4, and here Loek plays b7. There were some games in which b4 was played, but I don't know, probably because it was blindfold, Loek decided to go for bishop to b7. Queen to c7 was also an idea instead of bishop to b7. And Ivanchuk plays a3, and this is the move Ivanchuk was highly praised for, well, among other moves, because the immediate g6 here, with the idea of h captures on g6 and some h5 tal ideas now, you know, giving up a lot of pawns for the attack to happen quickly. White does prevail if black continues like this. The problem is after g6, black isn't interested really in capturing h captures on g6, and this actually leads to a well-known draw, and it was a well-known draw in 2006 as well after black plays b4. Now what would happen is g captures on h7 with check, king h8, knight to d5, now offering the knight, e captures on d5, and now bishop captures on g7 with check. King captures on g7 and rook to g1, check. Now king h7, bishop to h3, and f5 now. Queen to f4, rook to f6, and this was all known at the time. Bishop captures on f5 with check, and now king h8. Rook to g7. It was known, even this move was known, getting the queen into the attack with tempo. King captures on g7, queen to g4, check, king to f7, queen to h5 with check, we have king to f8, and now queen to h8, and now, unfortunately, white doesn't have any more resources to continue the attack, so he's forced to do a threefold repetition. King f7, and then again queen h7, king f8, queen h8, king to f7, and this was a well-known draw. So now that you know this, now you can appreciate this a3 move, stopping black's advance for now, this b4 move, and Ivanchuk will push g6 eventually. Rook to c8, Loek gets the rook into the attack. We have rook to g1, knight to e5 now, eyeing the f3 pawn. Queen to e3, defending, knight to c4 now with a tempo on the queen here. Bishop captures on c4, rook captures on c4, and now h5. And now Ivanchuk is definitely ready to push g6. Rook to e8 was played by Loek here. And this move really doesn't give Ivanchuk any problems, and I mean, g6 is there for the taking. A more resilient idea would be something like b4, going straight for the attack of his own. And after something like bishop to b6 with a tempo on the black queen, queen to c8, a captures on b4, rook captures on b4. Now black at least gets some counterplay. But Loek's idea was going straight into, Ivanchuk's hand. Rook to e8. Ivanchuk played king to b1 first, not allowing any bishop g5 ideas in the future, pinning the queen to the king. So queen to c7. Now kind of blocking that knight since the c2 pawn is attacked. b3, and this is probably the last moment Loek could have done something to improve on his position. Loek played rook to c6, but the only real move and a real try for black here was rook captures on d4, giving up the exchange but gaining some counterplay. After queen captures, rook to c8 now, attacking the knight on c3, rook to d3 defending, and d5. Now Loek is kind of threatening this a3 pawn. He's threatening to open up the position. This light square bishop comes alive. He also has a very strong threat on the c-file, and this would have been much better than what he played. But okay, after b3, rook to c6 was played, and Ivanchuk does the blindfold knight to d5. Very nice. And what do you do here? You can't really... It's not easy to decline this knight. He is attacking the queen, he's attacking the bishop. If you play something like queen to b8, this loses the knight to f6 check. And now you're losing the rook anyway, so you didn't really give up anything. And if you capture the knight, then g captures on f6, queen to g5 check is a threat, followed by queen to g7 checkmate. And if you defend this with king to f8, king to h8, if you go king f8, king h6 is mate in 1, so no point in doing this. After this, king h8, and now queen to h6, threatening queen to g7 checkmate. And after rook defense, simply rook to g7, and there is no defense against queen captures on h7 with checkmate. If you capture the rook, queen captures on g7 is checkmate now. So after Ivanchuk played knight to d5, Loek captured it, e captures on d5. And now we have e captures on d5, threatening to capture the rook. This is now the immediate threat, and if you allow Ivanchuk to capture your rook, you're down the exchange, and you're still getting attacked, so you're going to lose this. Rook captures on c2, and now Ivanchuk pushes g6. As black really doesn't have any move that would help him continue the attack of his own, first he has to defend. H captures on g6, H captures on g6, and now Loek admits that rook to e8 move wasn't really the best idea. He plays rook back to f8. G captures on f7 with check, rook captures on f7, and now comes bishop captures on g7. And Loek captured it with rook captures on g7, but there really isn't a better move here. If you try something like rook to h2, preparing queen to c2 with check, and queen to b2 with checkmate, unfortunately this loses to bishop to e5. Now opening up a discovered attack from the rook, and now you're grabbing the rook on h2. King f8, bishop captures on h2. You're down the exchange, and you're still getting attacked. So, I mean, black is losing this big time. So after bishop to g7, Loek captured, rook captures. Queen to e6 with check was played. King to h8 was played by Loek. If king to f8, this doesn't help him. Rook captures on g7, threatening rook g8 checkmate. King captures and rook to g1, and it's all over. So after queen to e6, king to h8 was played, but now rook captures on g7, and we have the same idea. King captures and rook to g1. Again, the threats are the same. King to f8, rook to g8 is checkmate, and if king goes to h7, then either queen to g6 followed by queen g7 checkmate, or the immediate queen to h3 would also be okay. After bishop h4, queen captures on h4, again checkmate. But after the other rook gave check on g1, Loek Van Wely resigned the game, and this beautiful blindfold masterpiece was achieved by Vassily Ivanchuk. Even though he got last place in the tournament with only 3.5 out of 11 points, nevertheless, this is the game everybody remembers from that tournament in Monte Carlo of 2006. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.